In this week's Parsha, we read the episode, the calamitous event, when the Jewish people bowed down to the golden calf. Having assumed erroneously that Moses, the Moshe Rabbeinu, was not in fact going to be returning to them after he ascended the mountain, 40 days later, when they anticipated his arrival, they saw that he hadn't come down. They'd made a miscalculation of a day, and a certain group that had infiltrated the Jewish people when they left Egypt encouraged the Jewish people to make this golden calf, which was miraculous in its making. The Jews contributed, unfortunately, the gold, and when they cast it into a fire, it miraculously formed the shape of a golden image. Moshe Rabbeinu descends the mountain, he sees what's taking place, and he casts down the two tablets of stone that he was carrying with him, and they break and splinter into pieces. Thereafter Moshe Rabbeinu reascends the mountain to beg God to forgive the Jewish people. For a further 40 days, comes down, and he gets the second set of tablets. When we finally have the declaration made by God, which is so familiar to us because we say it on Yom Kippur, Vayomer Hashem, and God said, Salachti kidvarecha, I have forgiven as per your words, Moshe. It says that in every sin that is committed in future generation, there's an element of that golden calf as well. And when Moshe Rabbeinu finally is able to cajole, coerce, convince God to permit the making of a second set of tablets, he's instructed Psal Lecha to go and to carve out the stones for himself, and God will do the writing. But Moshe Rabbeinu himself was to carve out the actual stone, whereas in the first set of tablets, that particular function was performed by God himself. I want to primarily focus on what we're all familiar with, and that is a prohibition against graven images. One of the 10 commandments, Lo yeh lecha pesel, you should have no graven image. We all know that paganism, idolatry, is perhaps personified. Perhaps it is made very clear to us the moment that we start to see images that people bow down to, little idols that people bow down to. To us, we anticipate that that is the idea of idolatry. And as I said, the Torah, God says in the 10 Commandments, Lo ta'aseh lecha pesel, one is not allowed to make a graven image. And our commentators therefore grapple with the fact that in this week's parsha, the exact opposite is told. Psal lecha shnei lechot habanim karishonim. I do want you to make, it's not an image, but to carve out. There's a synergy of words. Lo ta'aseh lecha pesel, you should not make a graven image, and pesal lecha, you should engrave. And some of our commentators have picked up on this apparent contradiction, that on the one hand we're told to make no graven image, on the other hand we're told to do precisely that in this week's parsha. And the answer that is given is one which is very important and very significant. When God says, Lo ta'aseh lecha pesel, He prohibits us from making a graven image, we have to look at the conjugation of the sentence in order to truly get an insight, not only on this particular instruction, but on life as well. Lo ta'aseh lecha pesel. Make not for yourself a graven image. And the word for yourself presents itself before the graven image. In this week's parsha, however, psal lecha, a graven image for yourself. Carve out for yourself. And our Rabbi suggests that really in here lies the true secret, the true answer to the difference between spirituality and godliness and materialism. We could go so far as to say idolatry as well. And the idea is very simple. That when it's all about me, when I am the main focus, so lo ta'aseh lecha, make not for yourself a pesel, graven image. Then already we're looking at idolatry. We're looking at something that is clearly prohibited. However, psal lecha, when the ego, when the I comes at the end, that's already a different story. And that in fact reflects the difference between godliness and spirituality and materialism and perhaps idolatry. Godliness and spirituality is about what God wants me to do. Materialism and idolatry is about what I want to do. And where the I comes, does it come after or does it come before? Is it first or is it last? Makes the difference between a holy activity and idolatry. And therefore it's not strange for us to understand that sometimes the performance of Judaism, leading our lives in accordance with our ancestral beliefs and the instructions of the Torah, can sometimes itself also be idolatrous. The question is, who am I serving? Am I serving myself or am I serving God? Which comes first? Unfortunately, there are people who their entire service of God, however it manifests itself, is about me, what I want to do, what I'm comfortable with, and what I'm going to get out of it. That's not Judaism. That's not godliness. That's not spirituality. That is self-serving. That's an individual who bows only to himself, who views only himself as being great, significant, and noble. The Jew who is willing and wishing to serve God submits himself to God's divine wish, is willing to do aspects in their lives which are difficult, but ultimately it's that which is requested by God. That's the difference between spirituality. Do I do my Yiddishkeit that makes me comfortable, or do I do Yiddishkeit that makes God comfortable? Do I serve God the way I want to, or do I serve God the way He wants me to? And if we serve God the way I want to, not the way He wants, this isn't Judaism, it's not godliness, it's not spirituality. Unfortunately, it's idolatry. Psal lecha, the I always has to come at the end. And that ultimately is the true definition of godliness and spirituality. And if I can just end off with something which Lord Jacobovitz once said, I believe in the House of Lords. He says, if we look at two words, each one manifestly representing one the spiritual and the other the material. The word that represents the spiritual is soul and the material is soil. And he noted that really the two words have very little difference. S-O-L is in actual fact common to both of those. The difference between the material and the spiritual. Soul has the U. Soil, the material, has the I. The difference between godliness and serving God and idolatry is, am I self-serving or am I serving God? Please God, we should take this message of Psal Lecha, that we should always put God's wishes before our own and submit ourselves to what God wants from us. And hopefully thereby we will be able to merit, as the sages tell us, when we do what God wants, then in return, please God, God will do what we want and bless us with everything we require. Good Shabbos.